during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information. On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's First Edition. We're delighted to host the virtual launch of Tahmima Anam's latest book, The Startup Wife, published by Penguin Random House, India. Mansi Subramanian, executive editor and head of literary rights, Penguin Press, publishers of the book, shares her thoughts on The Startup Wife. Mansi, over to you.
On behalf of Penguin Random House India, welcome to the book launch of The Startup Wife by Tahmima Anam at the Jaipur Literature Festival. Tahmima Anam will be in conversation with Janice Pariat talking about her brilliant new book. The Startup Wife is the story of a brilliant coder named Asha Ray. Asha is poised to revolutionize the world of artificial intelligence when she's reunited with her high school crush, Cyrus Jones. Cyrus inspires Asha to write a new algorithm. And before she knows it, she's abandoned her PhD program, they've exchanged vows, and gone to work at an exclusive tech incubator called Utopia. The platform creates a sensation, with millions of users seeking personalized rituals every day. Will Cyrus and Asha's marriage survive the pressures of sudden fame, or will she become overshadowed by the man that everyone is calling the new messiah? In this gripping, blistering novel, award-winning author Tahmima Anam takes on faith and the future with a deft touch. Come for the radical vision of human connection. Stay for the wickedly funny feminist look at startup culture and modern partnership. Can technology, with all its limits and possibilities, disrupt love? We're going to find out.
Thank you so much, Mansi, for joining us. You all know Tahmima Anam is the recipient of a Commonwealth Writers Prize, an O. Henry Prize, and has been named one of Granta's best young British novelists. She's contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and was recently elected as a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Tahmima's latest book, The Startup Wife, is a brutally honest yet humorous meditation on marriage, faith, and aspiration, following the journey of a newly married couple's tryst with an exclusive tech incubator called Utopia, which allows people to perform religious rituals online. The narrative pulsates with undertones of technology and apocalyptic anxieties rooted within a cautionary tale. Tahmima Anam, thank you so much for joining us today. Love to hear from you about your book and the journey. Tahmima, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chandra. It's such a delight to be here. Although I feel it is a bit bittersweet since I love going to Jaipur in person. It's one of the highlights of the year for me, anytime I'm invited to go. And I just wish we could be doing this in person. But nonetheless, I'm honored to be here. The Startup Wife, as you can imagine, from seeing, if you know any of my previous novels, is a big departure for me. All of my previous novels were set in Bangladesh. And this one is set in New York. And it is not so much a historical novel about the formation of a nation and its future, but rather about the formation of a new kind of technology and how that new kind of technology is built and what happens to the humans who built it, what happens to their relationship, what happens to their marriage. And it really is about this character, Asha, who is a brilliant engineer and yet finds herself being sidelined by none other than her very own husband.
Thank you so much, Tahmima, and we at JLF First Edition are delighted to release The Startup Wife. Tahmima, as you know, you're always welcome at the Jaipur Literature Festival. And inshallah, we hope that in 2022, we may well be back on board live and look forward to having you there. Today, you're in conversation with poet and writer Janice Pariat, and Tahmima will explore the precarious balance between gender dynamics, startup culture, and true love. Janice Pariat is the author of Boats on Land, a collection of short stories, and Seahorse, a novel. She was awarded the Young Writer Award from the Sahitya Academy and the Crossword Book Award for Fiction in 2013. Her novel, The Nine-Chambered Heart, is being translated for publication into 10 languages, including Italian, Spanish, French, and German. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask questions by typing it into the comment link below, and we will ask Janice to ask Tahmima these questions. And now, the startup wife, Tahmima Anam, in conversation with Janice Pariat. Tahmima, Janice, over to you.
Thank you.
Let me just unmute myself first. Thank you, Sanjay. And hello, Tahmima, and good evening or good afternoon to everyone who's joined us here today. Tahmima, one day we'll be talking about books in Jaipur, I promise you, but it's very lovely to be here with you today as well, especially because we're celebrating the launch of an extremely, extremely special book. So many congratulations to begin with. I wish I had a hard copy to proudly display on screen. I don't at the moment. I only have a PDF, but regardless of where I read your book, I loved it. To be very honest, it hasn't been easy to read over the last few months. It's been very difficult, being in Delhi, in India, with everything that's been happening, in the country, in the world, really. And The Startup Wife sort of came to me at just the right time. And it sort of lifted me out of this slightly shadowy, dark space that I'd been in over the last few months. It was blazingly funny, Tahmima. I want you to just, at some point talk about how you just managed to get that balance so right. But it was just so funny and so sharp and so tasty. And if that's a word at all. So many, many congratulations.
Thank you so much, Janice. That's very generous of you. And I'm delighted to hear that I could help you come out of your reader's block, which so many of us have had this experience of feeling unable to read. I think it's a very common thing. So I'm thrilled to hear that. And thank you so much for your kind words.
No, not at all. It definitely did. It just sort of really lifted me. And I'm sure it will for a lot of other people as well. So I have sort of, a bunch of questions for you, but I would like to start a little bit before the beginning. As you've already mentioned, The Startup Wife is quite a different book to the ones you've written before. In fact, given where I am at the moment, I'm in Meghalaya, I'm in Shillong, which borders Bangladesh. Your trilogy, the books that you've written, about the history of the formation of a nation and how that's intertwined with the lives of this family, it's had such an influence even on the politics and the demographics of where I am in Meghalaya. So it's rather special, to be sitting here and having a conversation with you. But as you said, the startup wife, so different, so utterly sort of thematically, geographically different to the Bangladesh trilogy. And I'm just interested to begin with in what that journey was for you between those three books, you know, the last being The Grace of Bones, and to the startup wife. What was that journey for you like?
Thank you, Janice. So I, I grew up listening to stories about the Bangladesh War, and that first novel was really born out of what I consider to be my cultural and political inheritance. And that sort of continued with the trilogy, and I was born in Bangladesh, but I didn't grow up there. But I really consider it to be my sort of spiritual homeland. And I think I will always write novels set in Bangladesh. I will always be concerned with telling those stories. They are the ones that are deeply kind of buried in my soul. Having said that, I also have another life, another career, and also another sort of cultural influence, which is the influence of New York and of America, basically, because I have now spent a majority of my life living in the United States. My husband is American. I moved there when I was, 7 years old with my parents when my dad had a job at the UN, and we lived in Queens. And I have also, for the last 10 years, been on the board of a startup that was founded by my husband. And it was a world that both of us were entirely unfamiliar with. He happened to create a new kind of music technology. In fact, when we were in Jaipur the first time, he actually came with me. And I remember he was drawing pictures of the product that eventually became the first product that they launched. That was a very meaningful trip for us. But I've been on the board, and I was able to watch startup culture from the sidelines. And I thought, this is a world that is ripe for satire. And one of the really, as you'll know, Janice, one of the really delightful things about being a writer is that when you have an experience in life, you have somewhere to put it. So I was part of the startup world. I was watching it from a little bit from the sidelines, and I noticed some things about it that I found surprising, that I found funny, and I filed it away in my little writer's filing cabinet in my mind to say, like, oh, someday I'm going to write about this. And it's been on my mind for about 10 years. And after I finished the trilogy, I thought, well, this is a great moment. And the writing of this book was, in a way, much easier than some of the others because there was less research, and it had kind of been building up in my mind over the course of this experience, and it all kind of came out in a rush once I discovered the character of Asha.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about the character of Asha, who is just brilliant. She's funny. She's, she's cursing all the time. And she's just, won really over my heart. And I loved Asha for so many reasons. And that was really just going to be my next question, to say, where does she come from? She's very different to Rehana, to Maya, to Zubaida, your previous, women characters. How did you find her?
So I'm glad that you love Asha. And I think Asha, probably of all the characters I've ever written, is probably the most beloved. And Cyrus, her husband, is probably the most hated, although I didn't write him to be sort of villainous, but especially young women have a very powerful reaction against Cyrus. I think possibly because Asha comes off seeming like the most confident, the most sassy. She has a sharp tongue. She's very clever. She doesn't seem to be held back by anything. And I sort of wrote her, I imagined myself being 10 years younger and basically shedding a lot of my obedient nature, and I think I feel like in all the ways that I've been rebellious in my teenage years, and my parents will obviously say that I certainly did rebel. I think that a streak of obedience was still very much a part of my character. And I thought, what if I took that away? What if I created a character who was clever and funny and also very, very in possession of her own kind of power? And then what if I created that character, but then I made her be limited by the sort of sexist and patriarchal structures of the workplace. And even someone like her can be diminished both by the workplace and by this startup culture, but also even by her husband, who she loves. So if someone like Asha can be limited, can be constrained, then it really sends a powerful message about the sort of forces that are kind of beyond us. So I took great pleasure in creating her as a character. I really adore her. I want to be her. And because I wrote her, I got to experience being her in some form. So that was a very kind of delightful experience for me. And I'm glad that you are also fond of her, as I am.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you say that you loved writing her and it was such a delight to bring her to life, you can tell it's there in the writing, in the book, in this character. There is a lot of joy that's gone into creating her, and she is that kind of character that stays with you. And I love that she's so confident, and I love that she doesn't really see many barriers in what she wants to achieve. And very early on in the book, when she and Cyrus are, they're sort of just getting together, and she's just, I think, bringing up this idea of what she might like to do with this complicated algorithm. And he's like, no, I don't think, that's going to work. And she just says, but I knew it was just a matter of time before I worked it out. That's the line. And I just thought, oh my God, this is, it's rare. It's sad, but it's rare for a woman character, to just out and out say this. I've spent a lot of time, don't ask why, over the last few summers reading botany books by Edwardian and Victorian scientists, women scientists. Wow. And the thing that I noticed in their introduction, Tahmima, was that they constantly apologized that if there are any errors in this book, they're all mine. And this is a very small sample of, what this subject is about. And of course, the male botanists, the male scientists, this is the only book you'll ever need for this subject. It's all here. So I was just struck by the tone that Asha, uses about her work, about herself, about how confident she is. But then, of course, there's Cyrus. And the fact that, she is part of this extremely male-dominated, space, the tech world. And we see how, of course, and that's what largely the book is about, we see how she grapples with that. I'm interested also in the dynamics between Asha and Cyrus. Because, of course, there is deep and abiding love there as well. But there's one particular scene that comes back to me where they're in an elevator and Asha is looking at the reflection, of her and Cyrus standing side by side. And she says, one's tall, one's short, one's got long hair, one's got short hair, one's a spiritual humanist guide, and one's a coder. And I just wanted to know how you thought of bringing those two things together in the form of these two characters, of course, and whether, this was a larger observation on the nature of spirituality and coding.
Thank you. I mean, the story, I think of it as a romantic comedy. And the romance part of it comes right at the beginning of the story. And often when you read a rom-com or when you watch one, you think, are they going to get together? And the question in this book is not, are they going to get together? Because they get together very early on and it's absolute magic and they fall in love. And in fact, she has been in love with Cyrus for many years before they re-meet. So they meet as children, in high school, and then she has a crush on him and then she meets him again. And I basically did that because I wanted her to be the startup wife at the beginning of the story. And the question is, are they going to stay together? is the marriage going to survive? Is the love and the relationship going to survive this huge success that they're both going to, you know, go on this journey? And do we want them to stay together? Is them staying together going to be at the risk of Asha like losing her power and losing that formidable self-confidence that she enters the page with? So that's the kind of slight reversal of the rom-com genre. Now, I really did want their relationship to be real. I wanted their connection to feel real, so that whether they stay together or not is something that we genuinely care about. On the other hand, as it so often is with men and women, for her to be with this man that she has adored her whole life comes at a risk. You know, it's hard for her to maintain her sense of self and identity in the presence of someone who plays such a large role in her imagination. And that is kind of exemplified by her creating this algorithm. So she creates this algorithm. It's called We Are Infinite, and it takes all kinds of rituals from all religions and all faiths and all even novels and stories, you know, things that aren't actual religions. And it gives you a personalized ritual, okay? And she's inspired by Cyrus. But because Cyrus is already, she sort of makes him the head. She said, "Oh, I'm just a coder. You know, this is you. You're the you know, you be the CEO." Yeah. And she literally creates a formula that makes millions of people worship her husband. So it's like taking this sort of the classic heteronormative male-female dynamic, which is the woman kind of lifting the man up, and it sort of amplifies it, and the technology kind of amplifies that dynamic. So yeah, I wanted us to both feel like, wow, we really believe in this love story and we want these two people to stay together. And I wanted us to feel conflicted about that. I wanted the reader to feel like this is a battle between the love story and the story of self-actualization.
Yeah. No, and that's how complicated life is. It's never a simple, you know, there are no simple answers when it comes to relationships like this. And that's what makes the relationship at the center of this book so interesting. Because there are no easy answers. It's not a question of, oh, she should just leave him, oh, she shouldn't. It's not, you know, it's so much more complicated than that. And so are the relationships in our lives. You know, how do we deal with the red flags that people we love, that we see in the people that we love and care about on a sort of daily, you know, day-to-day basis? Those are the struggles, right? And I thought that, you know, this comes together so well in the novel. And what you set out to do, Tahmima, that's, you know, exactly how we feel following the trajectory of their relationship and where we're left with at the end. And you sense that there's this change in Asha. I don't want to give too much away, but there's this wonderful line where she says, "I give myself the gift of not doing that, of not going after him." And oh my God, it's so powerful, because that's what women also must do. They must claim that power for themselves, because it is a gift to themselves. And it's so wonderfully written line.
Thank you.
I want to go back to the idea of ritual a little bit. And this book is many things, as we know. It's this dark rom-com. It's this, you know, it's slightly apocalyptic as well. And I thought it is at its heart deeply sort of philosophical. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. But I was reading this Guardian article that said, you know, yes, these books are very different, the Bangladesh books and this book, but what also connects them is perhaps the act of ritual, where you have, you know, in the first book, Rehana having a little ritual to celebrate, you know, the coming back of her children from Lahore. And here, of course, at the center of the book is the idea of ritual giving meaning to people's lives. Also interesting that it's a book that's bringing up ritual in a moment when all rituals then get disrupted, right? And we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. But back to ritual and you know how it forms the heart of this novel as well. And I was just wondering whether that's sort of your anthropologist's interest, your anthropologist's eye that comes in. Is it true that ritual calls to you in this way through your work?
Thank you. So yes, I am an anthropologist, and those of you out there who know something about the subject know that ritual plays a big part in the way that we understand culture and cultural practice. Part of the reason that the main startup, so this book contains many startups because it takes place in a tech incubator called Utopia, okay? And I had a lot of fun inventing the startups that take place in this, and I made them all up, and that was a really fun kind of project. The main startup, which is called We Are Infinite, is about ritual. And I both, am interested in ritual, and I thought it would, it was something that I thought would make an interesting kind of alternative social media platform, because people are connected through ritual versus being connected through things that we might consider more superficial that we see sort of on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But also, Asha and Cyrus are outsiders in the startup world, okay? Asha is a scientist. Cyrus is this kind of person who floats around and marries people and officiates at funerals. And she calls him a humanist spirit guide. They are not your typical tech entrepreneurs. They're not from the world of business. And it was important for me to create that outsiderness because it allowed us to see that world through their eyes. And so I needed to give them a startup that was not a typical startup. I needed to give them like a very weird, something that you wouldn't expect, and something that came very much from left field, because then they could say, oh, well, this is the world that we're observing, but it's not really us. And as a writer, you have to create outsiderness in your characters so that you can make social commentary, so that we can look at the tech world. Asha can look at the tech world sort of in the way that I did, which was like, well, I'm a writer. I'm not, a founder of a company. Asha is a little bit more on the inside because she actually starts the company and she goes through on that journey. But the whole time she's getting used to the language, she's getting used to the way that startups work, the way that VCs talk, the way that, money is like distributed and things are funded and that whole process. So I needed to give them a startup that was truly unconventional. And it felt like why would be the perfect thing, because it's extremely popular, but it's kind of a hippie fantasy. It's like a little bit of an alternative culture fantasy. And we kind of get to experience both of those.
Yeah. And the fun thing is, Tahmima, that you created a website for Utopia, which of course I went to check out. Yeah. And clicked through everything. So if anybody's interested, do check out, the website.
Here, I'll put it in the chat so everyone can see it.
Perfect. There's the tech incubator in the book that's called Utopia, and that sort of harbors all of these startups. And they're so fun also because they're not that far off from the truth. And it reminds me so much of all of these Black Mirror episodes that, we've watched, but we can laugh at it because it's still distant from us, but it's an uncomfortable laugh because it's not so far from, being believable. And I think that's why all of these ideas worked. Oh, and there you go. That's the website there for you. But just to come back to, this idea of creating meaning through rituals and the point that I brought up about how at the heart of this book, there is a deep sort of philosophical, idea as well. And it's asking us in this time, at this point, what gives us meaning? What is it that what is it that we we can do, that we derive meaning from. And I was wondering if that, of course we see it might not lie, the way out of this conundrum might not lie by putting our hopes on technology. As we can see, it goes quite awfully wrong, in the novel. I don't want to give too much away because I want everybody to read the book. But, what would you say sort of is the hope, or does the book offer us a hope or a way of understanding this very big question at the heart, of the novel?
So I think as a person who is not a non-practicing, a non-religious person, I have often wished that I had a belief system that I could put my faith in. And throughout this whole pandemic, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if there was a system of belief that would explain everything? And that is what people who have faith have. They have a system that encompasses every part of their lives. And because I don't have that, I have to create my own, pillars of things that are keeping me going. So for instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was all about the scientists, right? We didn't know that we were going to be sitting here with a vaccine that was going to protect us against the virus, although it has wreaked devastation across the world and destroyed so many lives and taken so many family members away and broken so many hearts. We have scientists who built this vaccine in record time. It was like by many, many times the fastest vaccine ever developed. And that felt like a huge consolation to me. But that's a small part of our lives, it's a small part of the pandemic. And so I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting to create this alternative reality in which people who feel that piece of their life is missing are able to get a community and get a sort of sense of that collective experience and sense of that holding on to something. And it's always been on my mind, ever since I was young and since I realized that there were going to be no easy answers for me. I think in terms of the sort of apocalyptic, like pandemic side of the novel. So one of the things that Asha learns when she gets invited to this tech incubator is that they're basically what Americans call preppers. Okay, so they're preparing for the apocalypse, and they're saying, we are going to fund companies that are going to help us to create a world after the end of the world. One of them is like a food tech startup where they're building food, turning electricity into food. There's all kinds of, there's ones that help you to deal with the way that you die online. There's all kinds of like post-apocalyptic things. And Y is invited to the incubator because they say, well, once everything in the world breaks down, we're going to need faith. And wouldn't it be great if we had one that kind of brought together all the faiths? So that was kind of the idea that kind of brought together the sort of sense of what you get at the end of the book, which is that sense that the pandemic is about to land on our doorstep with the kind of larger interests of the characters.
Yeah, and without sort of giving too much away again either, there is sort of a pandemic looming, at the end of the book. And I was wondering whether that was originally part of the storyline, or was it something that obviously you wrote in as we were going through the pandemic in real life. How did the timeline overlap?
I can't claim that I sort of predicted the pandemic before it happened. The part of the novel that I had written was when they come to Utopia and the head of the incubator says, we're here to sort of save humanity after the apocalypse. Mm-hmm. So I had already written that. And then when the pandemic started, I thought, gosh, I can't have one of the characters say there's going to be the world is going to end, and then have an apocalyptic event happen and not write about it. So when I was doing the final edits for the book, it takes place in New York, and you're just getting a hint of what's about to happen. It hasn't actually happened yet. There's been no lockdown. There's been no mass kind of, the deaths and all that, but you're just getting a sense of it. And I wrote that bit during the first lockdown in London when we were all at home and really had no idea how this whole story was going to unfold.
Yeah, no, in fact, I think in your novel, you don't even name the virus. It's just called the virus, and that leaves it, we know what's happening, but it does leave it open. I think I remember watching a little chat with you and Sanjay last year around the same time, I think when lockdown had just, we went in the midst of lockdown. It hadn't just started, but we were in the middle of it all. And I think I remember you saying, oh my God, I called my editor and I thought, the world is ending. I can't possibly publish this novel now. You mentioned that your editor, thank God she did this. She walked you, she talked you off that ledge. And I was just wondering, what was it that she said? What did I'm so grateful that she did, because we wouldn't have this. You would have burned your manuscript at that point, and we wouldn't, have this book with us now. What did she say? What did she say, about why it was so important for this book to be out even now amidst a world like this?
Janice, I have no idea what she said. I have no recollection of what happened, but I think what it was is that I felt extremely nervous that, things, that the book was somehow going to be too present. The events were going to be so raw that it was going to be impossible to read about them. And I didn't quite know how I was going to treat it. Was I going to try to write a novel that went through the whole pandemic? Was I going to not address it at all? I decided very early on that I did have to address it, because it was too weird for there to be the people to anticipate an apocalypse and then not to talk about it. And she just helped me, I think, to frame it in such a way that you just get a small hint of it. But the other thing relates to your first comment, which is the kind of lightness of tone and the funniness. And, writers have many, many ambitions. And over the course of my career, I have had all the ambitions that all writers have, which is to win prizes and have lots of fans and people read the book, and to bring some, truth, and to bring moments of realization for people who are reading it. But I have never had the ambition to make people laugh. And I did with this book, and I was very nervous about it, because I thought, I don't actually know whether I can write a book that is funny, because I've never even tried it before. And I don't think there is a single joke in all 3 novels that I wrote before this. It's like I was saving up all the jokes of my whole life to put into this book. And so that was definitely something that I felt nervous about, but also excited about. And I thought, gosh, if I can bring a little bit of kind of, not just like escapism, but if I can bring together some of the deeply political themes of the book that definitely are embedded within it, but also bring some joy to people who are going to read it, then maybe it's worth going through with it.
Well, I'm so glad, because I think there's a certain lightness and that just carries you through the book so easily. And in that lightness, there is laughter. And I think we often forget that even in the middle of an apocalypse, there needs to be humor. That's what helps us get through it. And of course, there's terrible loss, and there's, incredible devastation, but there is also love and laughter. But I'm interested then, Tahmima, in how, because as you were writing, your voice, I think, also changed with Asha in the startup wife. And how did you find this voice? Or is that a wrong is that not the right question? Do writers find a voice eventually, or is it something that they're constantly crafting as they go along, book to book? What do you think? How is it for you?
No, I don't think it's the right question. I think it's that I think that I needed to have the confidence to write an Asha book. I think the 3 books that I wrote previously, although I'm very proud of them and I stand by them and they mean so much to me, they were in a way a little bit safer, because people expect someone who looks like me, who has my last name, who comes from Bangladesh, and I'm very privileged to be a writer who comes from Bangladesh who is able to be published around the world, and I get to go to festivals and I have a platform, and it's expected that I would write novels that would almost like explain Bangladesh to the rest of the world, that would translate that country, to complicate that country, so that people's notions of whatever they read in the newspapers are complicated by the novels that they read that are set there. And having a sort of like ambassadorial responsibility towards my country to say, I'm a writer, not a lot of writers have the privilege of being published from Bangladesh, so therefore I should write a certain kind of book. Yeah. For me to set a novel in New York, even though I grew up there, but I'm not American, I'm from Bangladesh, for me to write a novel about tech and also to write a satire, I think it took some confidence, because it meant that that I was being judged by different standards than just like, oh, she's writing a very important book about Bangladesh, which, if whatever the success or failure of a novel would be, it would at least be that. And I think that as a woman writer, I think writing comedy, writing romance, one can feel often a little bit diminished, because a male writer writing a satire is often seen as a very serious political satirist. A woman, where she's writing a scene where people are telling jokes and talking about sex and talking about sexuality and bodies and in humorous ways, is like, oh, we're just going to read that as like, that's frothy or something. So, and I still have those concerns. I still feel like, gosh, did I do the right thing? Should I have written another really earnest book? Which I will. I'm still going to write those books, but was this a sort of like detour that was a mistake? And I still have those questions in my mind, but I think I had to have the confidence to actually do it. So
absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you did, Tahmima. I feel like I've sort of taken up everyone's time. I haven't asked you questions from the audience, but thank you so much for being so patient with all of my questions, and really so much love and so many good wishes for you and the book as it makes its way out into the world.
Thank you so much, Janice. You are such a wonderfully generous interlocutor. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Janice Pariat. Thank you, Tahmima Anam. I'm sure everybody who's been listening to this conversation is going to go straight and click on Amazon or their favorite site to be able to order up that book. It sounds absolutely fascinating. What better way than to spend the weekend with some laughter, read the satire that Tahmima Anam has written, not, as she said, on Bangladesh, but with confidence about New York and about startup life. So thank you both so much for being on First Editions. Like I said, I do hope you're going to go out and buy the book, and please do stay logged on to watch our next session, Owning Science, Owning Knowledge, G.R. Raghavendra, Chandrakant Laharia, Arundhati Dasgupta, Roger Highfield in conversation with Vikram Chandra, and that will be at 8:30 p.m. IST later today. Stay safe, stay double masked.
In these times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.